Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Adil Raja, your host. I welcome you to this Soldier Speaks English exclusive, and we are going to discuss the most important issue, which is on the mind of everyone. And for that, I have with me Theo Althorp-Mullis. Theo Mullis, let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, is a former police officer turned journalist and a fellow member of the National Union of Journalists of the United Kingdom. He's a war correspondent. He's covering the Ukraine war. He's been on the ground, and we've been collaborating off the YouTube as well. So this is my first vlog on YouTube, and I wanted Theo to come join me. So welcome, Theo, to Soldier Speaks English, my new YouTube channel. And I have started the YouTube again as part of
Yeah,
this
good.
pilot project. You know the background. So welcome. How are you doing?
I'm good. Thank you very much for having me on, Adil, and I'm very glad that you're back on YouTube. It's very good to have you here.
Thank you, Theo. Theo, before we jump to the actual topic today of what's going on in Egypt, what's this, peace 2025 conference, what's actually going on, stuff. Uh, Please give us an update about the Ukraine war, since you're actively covering it and you are the man on ground. We saw President Trump and President Putin in Alaska, and there was a lot of talk going on of peace,
Mhm.
but that seems to have gone for a six, and now we're back to square one. Are we back to square one? What's actually going on in Ukraine? Because that has got an impact on the situation all over, especially in
Absolutely.
Pakistan and India as well, because the Pakistani military is, as you discussed, providing ammunition to Ukraine, and that is why they've got the leverage over the European Union. And that's why I believe, in my opinion, the election rigging report of February 2024 had been, it has been snubbed, it had been hidden by the Commonwealth, and it is still being snubbed by the European Union. So, what is going on in Ukraine?
So the war goes on. The front lines are more or less static. Advances, when they are made by the Ukrainians or by the Russians, tend to be measured in hundreds of meters if there's an advance at all. Now, there's an ongoing siege around the city of Pokrovsk, which is far to the east in Donbass. Uh, 18 Russian armored vehicles just tried to push. Yesterday, I think it was, and all were destroyed. And this is a pattern that we see time and time again. And I was struck today when I was doing some work. I looked at the map and I was looking at the city of Kramatorsk, which is close to being, but not quite, a frontline city. It is repeatedly bombed. It is attacked with pretty much every munition that the Russians can get in range. And it is striking how close Kramatorsk is to the city of Bakhmut, which, calling it a city these days is perhaps a misnomer. It's more of a pile of rubble now. But there was heavy fighting over Bakhmut in May 2023. And since the Russians managed to take that city, they have advanced from Bakhmut perhaps about 30 kilometers in just over 2 years. So, if you want an idea of just how static the lines are, that's it. And bear in mind, while this is happening, the Russians are losing perhaps 1,000 a day, 1,000 men. That's KIA and wounded and missing. Now,
What about the
casualties.
Ukrainians? What about the Ukrainians?
The Ukrainians, we don't know because figures are hard to get, but they're lower because the Ukrainians, A, have fewer men to lose, B, are fighting a very different kind of war. Bear in mind, the Russians are constantly on the attack. They are constantly trying to push, and they are pushing through what's called meat waves, which is essentially a human wave. And they tend to get gunned down in fairly short order. But they also push with motorcycles, so soldiers riding the back of dirt bikes, and then they will push with special forces, VDV, Spetsnaz, and they tend to be more effective. They are quite effective soldiers. But the war is also very much a drone war. And from
So
Ukraine's perspective,
Theo, from what I'm getting from this update is that President Trump has taken a U-turn on his policy of alleged appeasement towards Moscow, and the
I
war
think
is
so.
going on.
Well, the war is going on. I mean, this is something that's often overestimated, is the United States' capability to influence this war. Vladimir Putin sees this as an existential war for the survival of Russia. Russia, bear in mind, as we've spoken about before, is an empire, and it feels that it cannot survive without control over Ukraine. And Ukraine is fighting for its independence. Ukrainian soldiers are fighting for what's behind them, because they remember Bucha, they remember Izium. And he overestimates just how much influence he has. And Ukraine manufactures 80% of its own drones, for example, drones being the primary weapon of this war. And they also manufacture a significant amount of their own explosive. They've just released a homegrown cruise missile called the Flamingo, and they've been engaged in, and this is actually where the war is very much being fought. And the theory of victory for the Ukrainians at the moment is attacking Russian oil infrastructure. Russia is a primary based economy. It's an extractive economy that is very reliant on oil exports. And Ukraine has been piecemeal destroying these plants.
So two things. Is that the reason why the US President Trump, is going after the Indians because they're getting oil from there? Is that the reason, do you think?
Yes, but it's foolish, because the previous administration told the Indians and told the rest of the world really that you can buy Russian oil, because saying don't buy Russian oil would spike the price of oil enormously. Countries would still buy it anyway, and Russians would be earning more money, right? So what they said is that buy Russian oil and we won't sanction you, but they are forcing through a variety of mechanisms the Russians to sell at a price which is very, very, very low. And that is seriously harming Russia's ability to make war while keeping people like the Indians on side. And Trump
So,
threw
so
that
it,
out the
it
window.
really doesn't matter if the Indians buy their oil or not. They're otherwise selling it so cheap that it's not benefiting Russia. Is that correct?
Oh, it's benefiting Russia, but it's not benefiting them as much as if, say, Trump would say stop buying oil, the Indians were to say no, and then the Russians, and then they were to buy at the same price. I mean, if the price of oil went up enormously, which it would if the Russian market was cut off, then the Russians would benefit from that, because they'd be able to sell their oil through other means. The shadow fleet, exporting to Azerbaijan and then repackaging it, exporting to China or exporting to India. Because India has the capability and has thumbed its nose at Trump before, and the Chinese certainly can and have. So I think it's foolish, and it isn't helping. Now, the Ukrainians attacking Russian oil infrastructure, that certainly is helping the war effort. We've seen prices of petrol rise quite significantly in Russia as they're unable to get it for the domestic market.
Yeah, yeah. So, Theo, just one question, last question on Ukraine, and then we'll move on to Middle East. But how much dependent is the Ukraine war on the Pakistani ammunition supply? You know that that's my
Yeah.
favorite question.
I mean, as far as supply of things, legacy ammunition, right? AK rounds, so AK-47, not very, AK-74 rounds, so 152 millimeter shells for the older Soviet stuff that the Ukrainians still have. The Pakistanis make an enormous amount of this. Europe, America does not. So if without the Pakistanis, the Ukrainians would have a boatload of Russian guns and nothing to fire.
So that means that the Pakistan will maintain a strategic leverage over Europe till the time the war in Ukraine is going on. Is that a fair comment?
Or until the time that Ukraine moves on to different weapon systems.
Are they
Bear
moving
in
on to
mind,
are they moving on to a different weapon system?
well, right now they have no need to. It would be a waste of resources for the Ukrainians because they have these 152 millimeter
Yeah.
artillery pieces, etc., from the Soviet Union. Why would they buy 155 M777s or British or German equivalents when they have these perfectly good guns and barrels still? So, no, they're still going to want this kit. But bear in mind that the Ukrainians, the war is a drone war from the Ukrainian perspective. And they're manufacturing the vast amounts of drones and the ammunition for them. And I've been to drone manufacturing facilities and I've been to the ammunition dumps. You don't smoke in those places. And they are very innovative. And it's almost like IEDs, right? So they are making IEDs on an industrial scale to be dropped or to be flown into tanks, and they work. They're working very well. But no, Pakistan still has this leverage because it is filling a gap that Ukraine needs and that Europe therefore needs.
Theo, moving on to Middle East, what do you make out of this so-called peace plan? Is it a peace plan or a projection of power by President Trump and his allies? What's been happening in Egypt and Sharm el-Sheikh? What do you make out of this? I mean, the British Prime Minister was there, Keir Starmer was there. There was other global leaders. I don't know what was the criteria of them being there, but they were all there. And what do you make out of this peace plan? Do you think this peace is going to hold in the light of what has been happening in Gaza Strip? What do you think about it?
The massacre in the Gaza Strip over the past 3 years will be a stain that will last for decades. I am desperate that it holds. If it doesn't hold, then the only thing that will happen is many more people will die. What I was mixing a video today. I'm looking at AP released drone footage from Gaza, and it can only be described as a wasteland. And now tens of thousands of Gazans who are still alive, thankfully, are returning home to, well, home is perhaps a bit of a misnomer. Rubble, districts gone. I hope that peace can hold, but given how things have been over the past few years, I don't know. It's such an open question, and Hamas is already. There were already battles taking place between Hamas and other groups within the Gaza Strip. Some groups wanting to kick Hamas out, some with Israeli backing, others without. Hamas wanting to reassert authority. There's this slightly ridiculous, that is a British understatement, incredibly ridiculous prospect of, I forget what Trump was calling it, a peace board to be led by Trump and to include former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. I mean, if we're going to do something like that, then Blair may as well put on a pith helmet and a red coat. Absolutely no way should a Britain. Why would a Britain have a seat in this council? If there is going to be an administrative council ruling or at least administering Gaza, then it should be the United Nations. Whether that will happen is another question, because what will Israel say? What will Hamas say? Hamas has already said it's going to deny any foreign guardianship over Gaza. And they're already armed clashes, as I said earlier. So it's really fragile. And I just hope that that the world's press can finally get into Gaza, because it's been the deadliest war for journalists, I want to say, ever, but I may need to be cited on that. Over 200 journalists have lost their lives attempting to report in Gaza, and Israel has consistently denied foreign journalists the ability to go in. I mean, I have been to the front lines of Ukraine. I have a press card from the Ukrainian government. I can go to, I'll need permission to go to certain places, but it can be done. Say if I wanted to go to Kherson, a very dangerous place to go, which is under constant attack, where you get hunted with drones, I can go. I just need to get the paperwork in. It isn't just denied. And yeah. I hope it holds. I don't know.
Theo, a related question about what's been going on in the past year or so. Heartbreaking, no doubt, heartbreaking
Absolutely.
indeed. Yeah. So, but at the same time, once it was all going on, you will see White House official handles on social media sending and posting these videos of turning Gaza into some sort of a holiday destination or trip. Yeah. So that is a classic example of disaster capitalism. Do you think the world is moving towards disaster capitalism based on the model what we are witnessing right now in Israel, in Gaza? And do you think this is just these are the foundations being laid of a much more volatile world?
That's a number of questions, some of which are quite difficult. Disaster capitalism. I mean, there's a phrase, never let a good disaster go by if you want to make money. It's a tale as old as time. I remember I studied classics, right? So the first fire service in ancient Rome was run by this guy Crassus, who's still the 9th richest man in history. And Rome was a wooden city, had a lot of fires. He would send his guys to go put out the fire only if you sold him the house at an understandably discounted rate, because it's got some damage at the moment. If you said no, then he'd let the house burn down. It's a tale as old as time. So I don't really think it's anything new. I do think what is new, though, is this billionaire class who have become, I say not new, perhaps we're returning to it, who have become almost neo-feudal. And they're very, very, very dangerous. And if we want to live in a free world, we can't have feudal lords. They're just completely incompatible.
But don't you think they are being represented at the very top at this the present world order?
Yes, and I think it's a problem. I think people like Musk, Peter Thiel, Donald Trump, the leadership in the PRC are all very, very wealthy, and it's very problematic. Although I do note that the PRC was not at the Sharm el-Sheikh peace conference, which is quite interesting, because they would have absolutely wanted to be, but they didn't get a word in there.
Yeah. So talking about Sharm el-Sheikh conference, there was I'm personally embarrassed because I've got these kind of, you can see it on the screen, people like asking that Pakistan has elected a clown. Once the Pakistani Prime Minister, elected is a strong word, and I would like to have a comment on that. Yeah. And people have been saying that Pakistan's Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif renominated President Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize at Gaza Peace Summit in Egypt today. And somebody's Roshan Amsali is writing, "Dear Pakistanis, are you proud to have this butt kisser as your PM?" All right. So, well, that's what he's been saying, and I'm sure you must have heard the clip. So,
wonderful candidate for Peace Prize, because he has brought not only peace in South Asia, saved millions of people.
So President Trump, once he was done with whatsoever he was supposed to be doing there, He said, "Well, that's it. Now let's go back home. We are done with it." So yeah. So it is an embarrassing statement, but to call him an elected prime minister, I've personally commented on this that unfortunately he's not the elected but imposed prime minister by the Pakistani military, which rules the country. The elected leader is Imran Khan, who's in jail on trumped up charges. So, what do you make out of the entire atmosphere and what has been going on over there?
Well, it's interesting. He's actually not the only world leader at the moment to float the idea of giving Trump or nominating Trump for a Nobel Peace Prize. I read that President Zelensky has floated the idea if Ukraine were to be sold Tomahawk cruise missiles, which is ironic, but Ukraine does need them. And they would be good for the war, from Ukraine's perspective and really for democracy. But I feel like world leaders are constantly trying to work out what is Trump's new thing that he wants. And they are dangling. It's like, have you ever seen the cartoons of somebody riding a donkey and they've got a stick with a carrot on the end? And that's what they're constantly trying to do. I will nominate you for the Nobel Prize if you do X, Y, and Z. Because he's desperate. He's very malleable, is Trump. And he's desperate to get one. And that's why Vladimir Putin, when the Nobel Prize was given to the opposition leader in Venezuela, he said, "Oh, it's ridiculous. It should have gone to Trump." Because
All right.
you see what I mean? World leaders are constantly doing this with him.
Yeah. So, do you think, Theo, the appeasement as a standard diplomatic practice with the present U.S. administration is a norm now? Is that to be taken as a normal? Or a new normal? Do you think that's the way to go about?
For the next 3 and a bit years, yes, probably.
All right, so we've got to accept it. There's no other way around it. So
the man is the president. We just got to handle that.
All right.
If it means a bit of indignity to serve your country. I mean, Mark Rutte called him, who's Secretary General of NATO, called him daddy. I mean, that's the indignity of that. I can't quite comprehend. And then Trump, of course, published it. But I can see why Rutte did that, because he's still the leader of the most powerful country ever, leading the most powerful military ever. And you still have to deal with him because he's constantly... Now, if he was an isolationist president who wasn't really interested in international affairs, then perhaps they wouldn't be engaging in this. But he's very into international affairs at the moment. He wants to be seen as a peacemaker because he wants people to stop saying the word Epstein.
Well, Theo, final question, and it's about geopolitics, about the great power rivalry. You just mentioned that President Zelensky in Ukraine wants a Tomahawk missile, so that is why he wants to nominate President Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. He seems to be obsessed about the Peace Prize. So yeah, makes sense. But my question is that during the 1980s Cold War, which is also known as the Jihad, against the USSR, which was being fought by the Afghans, who are today considered not so friendly, but they are the same people who won the Cold War for the US. So they were provided with Stinger missiles, which were a game changer against the USSR. Again, the same country, Russia, now is fighting Europe, much closer at heart to the Western civilization. And then how come the missiles like the Tomahawk missiles or some advanced weaponry has not been provided to Ukraine so far? And why are they using vintage weapons for which they need vintage ammunition from Pakistan?
Well, they're using those weapons because they have them. And if you have a weapon in an existential war, you're going to use it. I mean, Britain...
No, my question is about the modern weaponry like the missiles? Why are they not being provided?
Why? Oh, if I could answer that question, a heady mix of Biden-era cowardice, European inability to provide them, and also cowardice. If Russia had been given a short, sharp shock at the start of the war, which it was, but not enough, then I think we'd be in a very different situation. Now, Ukraine is asking for Tomahawks, and Tomahawks are being floated by President Trump because Tomahawks would very much assist Ukraine in its theory of victory, which is to destroy the Russian oil economy, right? And they are being quite successful at that. Now, they already can do it, right? They have their own cruise missile, the Flamingo, and they have the capability to send these little FPV drones thousands of miles into Russia through clandestine activity in the back of trucks, etc. It would just make it much easier. So the Ukraine is fighting with weapons from all over the world and all different eras. If you go to Ukraine, if you go to the front line, you will see domestic produced small arms. You will see imported small arms using different calibers of ammunition. You will see different kinds of machine guns. You'll see one truck with a Dushka, Soviet heavy machine gun, and then you'll see another truck with an M2 Browning, Western heavy machine gun. It's just the way it is. Ukraine has soaked up so many of the world's surplus arms, but it still needs things to fire out of them. And that's why Pakistan's factories are still important to Europe. Now, I think after this war, they're going to become significantly less important because Ukraine will move on to standardization along NATO lines where it gets rid of all this old stuff. But for now, it needs anything that goes bang.
So Pakistanis need to pray for a good end of the Ukraine war, and I'm sure the Indians also needs to pray for it because the entire world needs to pray for it. War is not good, but unfortunately, disaster capitalism is something which is being used by everyone or by those who are actually ruling the world right now, and we'll talk more about it in our coming episodes. So stay tuned and subscribe to Soldier Speaks English and share this this program. I'm sure that we've talked some sense, if not all. Thank you so very much, Theo, for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yeah, for this first program. See you very soon. Thank you.
See you soon. Bye-bye.